Hello and welcome to the official episode 1. As promised, we're going to get into some good mental health stuff. Like I said in the introduction, I want to focus on like particular disorders and also true crime. So I decided to kind of combine both of them together for this video. And the mental disorder that I want to talk about for this particular video is borderline personality disorder, and I want to relate it to one of the most prolific serial killers like ever in U.S. history, Jeffrey Dahmer. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of his, I'm going to focus more on like his upbringing, because that's like the crust of what kind of shaped him into being the serial killer he was to become. I'm not going to focus so much on the victims and stuff, because I want to let them rest in peace and really just show respect to them as well as their families, because it's really not, they're not the focal point of the episode. So I am going to go ahead and get into it, because I'll start rambling and we'll be like at an hour and 15 minutes. Jeffrey Lionel Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born May 21st, 1960, to Lionel Dahmer and Joyce Flint, I believe was his mom's name. And he was the oldest of two. He had a younger brother. And it is said that Jeffrey was a very energetic, a very happy child, energetic and happy child. He really was a really like happy kid, like normal child. And so his parents, on the other hand, his mom, I use my hands to rub this in because that's not, it's taking too long with that brush. But his mom was a hypochondriac and suffered from depression, and she just liked to have all the attention on her. She also grew up in a violent home, and I'm sure that affected the way that she parented. So she was just very all about herself and whatever her ailments or perceived ailments were. His dad, on the other hand, seemed to be pretty normal. On the outside, he was very focused and career driven. He was going to get his PhD, I believe, in chemistry or something, or some variation thereof. So that was kind of his focus. But he did later admit in his book, and also in an interview, I believe, with Skip Phillips, where he and Jeffrey Dahmer were being interviewed, he did admit that he has had like these fantasies or visions about murdering people. In his case, particularly like the neighborhood bullies or people who've done him wrong. But he did say he often would fantasize about killing and harming people. And he was very concerned that, maybe if he had he divulged these visions or these fantasies or whatever, maybe that could have possibly changed the trajectory of Jeffrey's life. I don't know. I personally think that it was like a combination of all the stuff that was going on in his childhood. But yeah, we're about to dive into that now. Up until age 6, like I said, they said Jeffrey was a very energetic, full of life kid, average kid. But at age 4, Jeffrey was diagnosed with a double hernia, which is like really amazing for like a kid. But yeah, he was diagnosed with a double hernia at age 4, and he had to have, it required him to have surgery. And so as, he's having this surgery, I guess he's waking up. I don't know if it was a combination of the anesthesia, or just the stress or anxiety of just having surgery at that young of an age, or it could even have been just the pain, because it sounds really painful, especially for a young child. But all of this caused Jeffrey to freak out and believe that his his penis had been cut off, and he was so terrified and just, like I said, extremely freaked out. He's like, Jeffrey was like, this hernia surgery that y'all keep saying that I was here for, that just must have been some kind of cover up. Y'all really got me here just so y'all could, you know, y'all could dismember my member. But Jeffrey, yeah, he wasn't feeling this whole hernia thing. I mean, this surgery. So he thought it was some kind of setup, and it really did kind of traumatize him. And it really kind of goes into how he would it affected like the way that he killed and what he did to his victims. So it had a pretty profound effect on him, this surgery. But it was said after this surgery, the light in him just kind of dimmed, and like a darkness started to kind of come in, and that's what his parents noticed from him. So he continued on, and you know, trying to live his life, and his dad still was working on his PhD and career or whatever. His mom still was doing the same stuff she was doing and worrying about, you know, what ailment she was gonna have that week. And you know, little Jeffrey went on, and I'm sure started to become more secluded and introverted because of the neglect. He was really feeling neglected. And so one thing I wanted to kind of touch on is the effects of these things. And so that's what I want to do. Like I said about these videos, I want to really bring awareness. And so I want to give a little bit of information on each thing that happened. So I want to talk about the effects of neglect on childhood, for childhood neglect and or abuse. I found this little write-up about those, and it says it gave like a really good account of what it is to be exposed to abuse and or violence and or neglect. And there was violence in the house. His parents would argue a lot. It was rumored and said that his mom was having an affair on his dad, and so that caused a whole bunch of arguments. And even sometimes it was reported that the arguments sometimes even got physical. Not sure who was the aggressor or if it was mutual combat, but young Jeffrey and his brother were witnessing all of this chaos in the home. And so that was unfortunate. But what we do know about the psychological impact of neglect and or abuse is that individuals who have experienced neglect and or abuse tend to employ different methods for handling the abuse. While depression and unaliving thoughts, YouTube does not like the S word, so we'll say unalive. Unaliving thoughts, antisocial disorders, and other forms of psychological consequences exist for the victims of neglect and or abuse. Research has discovered the additional roles which may lead to further risks associated with, you know, neglect or abuse. Gender also plays a part in how a child will go which way. They're saying that girls are more likely to internalize everything and are more prone to have low self-esteem, unaliving thoughts, eating disorders, and the like. But boys, on the other hand, are more likely to externalize the abuse. You know, that's how they kind of cope with it, and they tend to become more aggressive and violent towards others. And so neglect, in addition also to, you know, depression and the other things, but that is one of the things that really tended to happen. And so it's like, as we move through his childhood, I will give you kind of little notes on like how this stuff shows up later on. So the neglect and the, you know, and witnessing, you know, the abuse. And to me, neglect is abuse. If you're not, you know, giving your child emotionally what they need and deserve, that's, to me, that's a form of abuse. It's emotional abuse. But yeah, so that's something that he experienced very early on, was being neglected by his parents. Jeffrey moved into I guess like junior high-ish, those ages. He started to get this interest at first. I think it was first like it was just like a little, like, you know, like a little interest in animals and the skeletal structure of animals and death and that kind of stuff. But more, at first it seemed pretty harmless, like it was just something, like maybe he was just interested in it from a scientific perspective. He was very interested in how the bones kind of fit together and that kind of stuff. And so when he was in, I want to say junior high, I'm not completely positive, but it was said that he was in junior high or one of those, and they were dissecting an animal like most of us did in school. He was dissecting a guinea pig, and they went through the whole little act, but Jeffrey decided he was going to take the guinea pig home with him because, you know, he just really he wasn't done there. That wasn't enough. That little taste of dissecting that they were doing in class, Jeffrey said that wasn't enough for him. So he brought it home. And so he was known to, whenever he would be riding his bike and he would see like a dead animal or something on the side of the road, he would stop and pick it up and, you know, do his thing, take it apart, you know, do that to really learn and see what was on the inside. But on a somewhat more positive note, I guess, his dad, I guess, started to kind of catch wind of his son's latest hobby and interest. And he, you know, showed young Jeffrey the correct way to par the flesh off and use acid to remove the flesh, and how to preserve the bones and how to put it together. So it's really more like from a science perspective that he was kind of showing like a little bit more interest in his son, which was good. That was a really, you know, that was a pretty good thing. That was really awesome that he was finally showing Jeffrey and giving Jeffrey some much needed attention that he had not been getting. So they were doing that. And but the problem with that is that he kind of showed him, from what I could gather from what I've read, is that he kind of showed him the correct way to do that, but then he disappeared again, you know. And so he would stay gone a lot of times as tensions grew in the household between the dad and the mom. The dad would stay gone even more because he didn't want to come home because there was so much tension and fighting and arguing, you know. And I was like, well, that's real selfish, because he was basically like, you know, screw my kids. I don't want to go, so I don't want to deal with that, so I'm just gonna stay gone. So that was something I was just like, wow, you know, everybody don't need children. Everybody does not need children. So anyway, so that happened, and so Jeffrey kept, you know, with his latest hobby / obsession with the animal bones and carcasses and all that. And so he went on, you know, and continued to live his life. And now it's rumored that Jeffrey was molested by a neighborhood kid. But it's something that his dad vehemently denies. His dad is like, that ain't happened. I don't know who's saying that, but no. So I don't know if it happened, if it didn't happen. I don't know if his dad is just in denial because, you know, no parent wants to admit to that. And because a lot of times, you know, some parents will feel like that's like I guess, evidence of their failure. You know, I failed to protect my child, so they don't really want to believe it for what, you know, for that very reason. But I don't know if it is or it isn't, but we will kind of explore that a little later on in this episode. So yeah, so he said that have happened to him. So now he is, because it's been so much neglect in his life. He's just kind of been conditioned and has conditioned himself to internalize everything and not get anything out. So all this stuff that's going on, he is just keeping it locked inside and is not at all divulging any of what is going on. So that's unfortunate, especially for a child or even a teenager. You need to get that stuff out. You need to discuss whatever it is that's going on. But Jeffery, unfortunately, was not doing that. So he goes on to high school, and he gets into high school, and he discovers that or realizes, or just comes to the realization that he's gay, which was interesting because the 70s were as free as people were. The 70s still was not a time where being gay was normalized. It's not as widely accepted as it is now. So being gay in the 70s was, I'm sure, a very scary thing to, to just kind of be having going on. It's like, oh my God, now what do I do? And then not only to realize that you're gay, but also not have an outlet. Not have an emotional outlet or anybody that you feel comfortable enough or safe enough with to talk about everything that's going on. It's like you were just literally, it's like a small storm that starts brewing just underneath the surface. So he's dealing with that. Also, at the same time, he is drinking very heavily in school. Like, a lot of his classmates would say that they would notice and see him have like a trench coat on, and he would be having his little drink of choice, whatever it is he wanted to drink at the time, and be taking it back, knocking them back throughout the day. And so that was something else that was interesting to me, because it wasn't very many places where I was doing my research where I found where they would talk about the effects of underage drinking. And underage drinking has a huge effect on the development of adults, just people in general. And so the underage drinking and effects of drinking alcohol as a teenager is, it says disruption, and this is from the CDC. It says disruption of normal growth or sexual development, physical and sexual violence, and increased risk of unaliving oneself, and homicide, which to me was extremely interesting. I was like, because he started to check all of those boxes. So you can kind of see like where everything is kind of falling into place. So he goes through high school with carrying all of this load, and he ultimately gets through high school. He does, I guess not too long after he got out of high school, he ended up molesting a 13-year-old boy. And he gave the textbook answer for any child molester, which was, I didn't know that he was 13. I was like, boy, bye. He claims he didn't know that the young man was 13 years old. I'm just like, okay, if you say so, Jeffery. But, he got arrested for that. He was arrested for, for that act. Then he actually ultimately ended up joining, I forget which branch of the armed services, but he went and got in the armed services, and I guess they thought, well, maybe this is good. This is some structure for him, some discipline, blah, blah, blah. But it seems that Jeffery couldn't leave the liquor alone. Jeffery himself, is like Jeffery just, that bottle was forever calling him. And so that's what he spent a good chunk of his time doing, was drinking instead of, I guess, training. So that didn't go very well. That didn't last too long. So he gets out of the military, or the armed services. I don't remember which branch. But so he gets out of that, and so he ends up coming, I guess, gets a job or whatever, and he moves forward towards starting his first and committing his first killing, his first murder. So He was, I guess, driving along, and you know, back in the 70s and the 80s and stuff, this was a time where hitchhiking was like super popular. Like it was so everybody was hitchhiking. It wasn't as dangerous as it would be today, but everybody would hitchhike. That was kind of like the normal way to kind of get around, was to hitchhike. And so that's what he did. So he saw this young man actually with his shirt off, and he just got all hot and bothered because he was just so smitten with this young man, and he just was like, oh, this is what I need in my life. And so he pulled over and lured the man by promising him alcohol and drinks and all that stuff. But you know, so he lures him back to his apartment, and so they're drinking, and then the young man starts talking about girls. And so I guess he realizes then, okay, well, he's not into what I'm into. So he's like, oh, crap. So then they continue drinking and chatting, having a good time. And then Jeffrey says, the young man said he was ready to leave. You know, he's like, I've got somewhere to be. I'm trying to get to this concert. But Jeffrey didn't want him to leave. And so he said, I wasn't ready for him to go, is what Jeffrey said. And so he ends up taking a 10-pound dumbbell and bludgeoning this man until he is unconscious. And then after that, he takes the same dumbbell and uses the flat part, the bar part of it, and strangles him to death. And then after that, he buries him outside of wherever I guess he was staying or living at the time. And then he goes on to you know, live his life. Then a couple weeks later, they say he unearths the young man and then uses a sledgehammer to crush his bones, and then spreads the bone dust, I guess, if you will, around his family home. So that was really, I don't know. That was a lot. All because this young man wasn't interested in your advances and wanted to go home. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about what borderline personality disorder is. Give you the textbook definition, if we will. So borderline personality disorder, it says you have an intense fear of abandonment or instability, and you may have difficulty tolerating being alone. That's one of the symptoms. But in general, it's a mental health disorder that impacts the way you think and feel about yourself and others, causing problems functioning in everyday life. It includes self-image issues, difficulty managing emotions and behaviors, and a pattern of unstable relationships. And so that is what kicked in, is that when the young man was like, I'm ready to go, that fear of abandonment and being alone kicked in, and he snapped. And so that's, you know, that's that BPD, as they call it for short, borderline personality disorder. So yeah, he was like, you stand here. Which is so sad and unfortunate, because that young man absolutely did nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. But the really interesting thing within all of this, and something else that I thought was really interesting, because when his dad was saying that he wasn't molested, but I'm inclined to think that it did happen, because one of the things that happens with children that have been molested, they either, it affects them in different ways, but re-victimizing is one of the ways that it can show up in their adult life. And that's what he did. He re-victimized that 13-year-old boy. And so it's like all these little things are just kind of, you know, showing back up in the way that he would commit his crimes. And so after he killed the first victim, he took like years off. And then from there, he moves on to his next victim. So after he did his first little killing there, he moved on to his second victim, and the second victim was almost 10 years later. And they said that's what's notorious with serial killers, is that they will kill somebody and they can literally have like what they're calling a cooling off period of years before they strike again. So he didn't strike again until like 1987. I think the first murder was in 1978. But then by 1987, 1987, he was back at it. And so during this time, he actually had met another victim and again lured him with the promise of partying and all this other stuff. And he said initially with this victim, his intentions were not to kill him. He just wanted to, as he put it, lay beside he wanted to just drug him and lay beside his unconscious body. He just wanted to lay next to him, I guess, and cuddle. But that did not happen, because he awoke to realizing that the young man his chest was caved in and blood was coming out of his mouth. And Jeffery says he doesn't even remember killing this young man. So he actually packs up the young man in a suitcase and takes him to his grandmother's house. He takes the young man to Jeffrey's grandmother's house. And that poor lady, she had no idea that any of this was going on. So he has a whole deceased body in her house, and there is where he proceeded to dismember and get rid of the body, get rid of the evidence. So he spent his time doing this to this poor young man's body, and then ultimately goes and discards it. But he discarded everything except for the young man's severed head. So he keeps the severed head, and I guess as his souvenir, and he used the head to pleasure himself until it basically got too brittle, and he ultimately ended up discarding that as well. I mean, he is like a special kind of crazy. But that's what he was doing with this poor man's body. Oh my God. I just could not imagine as a family member, of these victims. I just could not imagine being a family member of these victims and then having to be in court and listening to this and listening to how he did this and just how so cavalier he is about it and nonchalant about it. He doesn't seem to show any remorse, and and then saying that he couldn't stop himself. I don't know. I'm not a serial killer, so I can't attest to that. But I don't get it. I don't get it. Thank God I don't get it. But this is what he did. And so his victims and his process eventually just got more and more and more gory. He was known to sever heads and do all this stuff because he wanted to keep the skulls of his victims. And then it comes into account about him when he was 4, about him having the surgery and believing that his penis had been dismembered. And so if you followed this crime, they found, some severed penises in his possession. I don't remember if they were in the refrigerator or the freezer, but he definitely had severed the penis of some of his victims, which is just weird. You know, it's just weird. But it said, but all this stuff starts to tie back, you know, to his victims. And so they also have said that with the whole molestation thing, they also said that it's possible that that's how he ended up choosing his victims were based on the age and maybe build of the person who was rumored to have molested him as a boy. So that's another thing. But he even had gone to the point where he was saying that he really didn't want to kill his victims, is as much as he wanted to basically have them be in kind of like a vegetative or like a zombie kind of state, so that way they could be more, they could participate without any, and he could do what he wanted to without them resisting him like they would in, you know, if they were completely, you know, conscious and in their right state of mind. That was his thing. So he began experimenting where he would try to perform his own lobotomies, and he would pour boiling water on the brains of his victims. He would like drill a hole in their heads and their skull and their brain, and he would pour boiling water into their heads, thinking that this is a way to keep them in this vegetative state or this zombie-like state, so he can basically have somebody to play with. And I'm just like, I don't understand how you thought pouring boiling water on somebody's brain was going to, like, that was a good thing to do. You know, I just, this is just so crazy. But for me, overall, what I'm coming to understand from this is that it seems like the neglect was a huge part of what kind of did him in, because that seems to be it. Because like they said, as soon as he was extremely lonely. And what I didn't understand is he was not a bad looking guy. You know, he really wasn't. You know, love him or hate him, he wasn't a bad looking guy. So I'm like, you could have just found somebody, you know what I'm saying, that was into whatever it is that you were into, and just, you know, did it that way. I'm like, why did you have to, because you could have had that and more. You could have. So I just don't understand, like, why you just couldn't, you know. But that's mental illness for you. They had also diagnosed Jeffery with schizophrenia and some other things. But when I started looking and reading, like, the stuff for the personality disorder, which is what they kind of officially had on record, I guess, for his diagnosis, that was, I mean, that was spot on. I'm like, he is like literally the poster child. It's like they could have probably just researched him and just came up with their definition of what it was, because he was just literally like the walking poster child for BPD. But yeah, so that's him and his victims. Of course, he ultimately gets caught. One of his victims is able to overpower him and get away, and go and find a cop, and they come to check it out, and they're looking around, and he's, you know, of course, nervous because he has all these Polaroids and pictures of, you know, all of his handiwork of these poor victims who literally have done nothing wrong. And the cops end up finding these Polaroids, and it's over for him after that. It's later for you. It is literally later for him after that. Like, they done found you. They done found your little nasty pictures, and they see what kind of foolery you've been up to. So, baby, it's over for you. And so that ends up being what happened and how he got caught. And so, of course, he goes through trial and all that other stuff, and ends up going to jail. And he ends up getting caught, or not caught, but ends up being killed by a fellow inmate. And it is said, too, that he wasn't even, that he didn't put up a fight or anything with the inmate. When the inmate was coming in there and was ready to do him in and was ready to fight and kill him or whatever. And I believe the inmate was saying that I think he said God told him to or whatever. But I'm like, okay. It said that he didn't put up a fight. That Jeffery just kind of accepted his fate and just laid down and said, yeah, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go on down under, because I know I'm not going up above. I still believe that the guards were in on it, because the guards left this man who had already expressed a hatred for Dahmer and all that. Said, why in the world would you leave this man alone with him in whatever area? You know, I'm like, y'all set that man up. I mean, nobody, of course, is upset about it, except for, you know, Jeffrey's family. Of course, they are heartbroken. But I'm like, you have to understand that your son can't go around here committing these types of crimes and stuff, and then you want people to feel sorry for him. He had no regard for you know, his victim. So, I mean, don't expect the world to feel sorry because your son then got snuffed out by another inmate. He should have thought about that when he was victimizing all these people. But yeah, so that's pretty much the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. He just was a really troubled and awful person. It was a really interesting, if you guys have time, there's the interview with him and his dad by Skip Phillips. I forgot what, I think it's in the 90s, I believe. It was in the early 90s. But if you just go on Google and type in Skip Phillips, or on YouTube and type in Skip Phillips Jeffrey Dahmer interview, it'll pop right up. But it was very interesting. He did seem to have some remorse, though. He really did seem to display some remorse in that particular interview. So he did seem like he did have some regrets. But, you know, I think at that point, it's like too little too late. We don't care nothing about your regrets now. You should have had regrets way before you got to killing all these innocent people who have done absolutely nothing to you. But there's another thing that I'm really wanting to explore. And Jeffrey Dahmer kind of brings it up a little bit. But one of the things that came up while I'm doing my research for this one was talking about what happens with children that are victims of molestation. And one of those things was saying that that homosexuality is one of the things that can result later on in life for individuals that are molested. And that was the case for Dahmer. And then so when I'm looking for evidence, I'm finding that, you know, particularly in males that have been molested, a lot of times, especially molested by another man, a lot of times end up identifying as homosexual. And so I really am curious to know, you know, because even like with just friends that I know and their friends of friends, that has been the case. You know, I'm not saying that it's that way for every single male that, that's gay, but there has to be some truth to it, because it's like that seems to be like a lot of the commonality in some of the gay males, is that, yeah, when I was young, I was touched. I would really love to have like a serious conversation about that. I would love to have that, but it's a really sensitive subject to talk about. I don't know how I would even approach, and then you really have to be comfortable in sharing your story. So I don't know how comfortable somebody would be in talking about, you know, something so personal. But that has been very, very interesting to me, and that was something I had noticed before. And another thing that I had noticed and that was interesting to me when I was talking about Jeffrey coming out of the closet, right? Which I really don't like that phrase, but when I was talking about that and how he felt when he was internalizing that, that was something that I would ask my gay friends. Like, it was something that was very interesting to me before I even realized this whole, I was interested in that, but I was interested mainly in the mental health aspect of things and the emotional aspects of like how they felt, how gay people felt when they are holding it in. Like, yeah, I'm all interested in their coming out stories, but I'm also interested in like how did it feel? Like, what were your feelings when you realized that you were gay and you didn't necessarily feel comfortable yet to disclose that to anybody? Like, how did that feel? Like, what were your feelings? Like, how did you deal with that? How did you cope with that? A lot of them have really good friends, peers that, they can talk to. But one of my friends was saying that he had a lot of times he had thoughts of unaliving himself, because it was like, especially in the Black community, we grow up in church. A lot of us grow up in the church. And so the church, Black churches and just churches in general, but they preach about how wrong it is, how wrong homosexuality is and things of that nature. And so it's like, I'm doing something that's wrong, so in the eyes of God and according to the preacher and everybody, if I don't stop this, I'm going to hell and all of that. And so that was one of the things that he kind of identified with. He was like, I just really didn't understand what was going on. I just thought that there was something just really, really wrong with me because I couldn't get rid of it. I couldn't pray it away. He said nobody really chooses to be gay. That's something that he said. He's like, it's not a choice. Actually, both of my friends said it's not a choice. He said, because if I could choose, he said, there's no way in the world I would choose this. I would not choose to be discriminated against. I would not choose to have to, see disappointment on my mom or my family's faces. I wouldn't choose that. And so I'm like, yeah, that does make some sense. That makes a lot of sense. But he said just the thought of not being able to be who you are, or the fact of you being who you are, just repels people, and just they are so disgusted with you with you wanting to express yourself and just express your sexuality. That the fact that just makes so many people just so angry and just disgusted. He said that was just something that was really hard to stomach and to accept and to get past. He said, and that for that reason alone, that kept him very quiet about, his feelings for so long. Being around, guys, and you're attracted to them, and you try not to be attracted to them, and he said it was just too much to deal with. And so I'm like, okay. But that was a big thing. Was he said just the thought of unaliving himself was very, very prevalent. He said, I just did not want to be here because I just felt like there was something wrong with me, and there was nothing I could do about it. No matter what I did, it wouldn't go away. And so I just felt like it was just easier for me not to be here. And I just remember too, when I was in high school, I remember, I remember like when I was in high school, you would have guys and stuff, or girls that you would kind of know, you would know they were gay. But it was like, they were teased. It's like, it wasn't, it was, even though, because I went to high school in the 90s, and it was a little more well known or whatever, but they were still teased. Like, it still was not like normal to be attracted to the same sex. And so even if though you knew that these two people were, messing around with each other or whatever, they still would not dare say it out loud or divulge it or hold hands and that kind of stuff, because even then in the 90s it still was like, I am not at all trying to be ridiculed or any of that stuff. And so that was just, again, it's so unfortunate, man. I just can't imagine not being able to be who I want to be, because the rest of the world has a problem with it. They have a problem with me, who I sleep with. even though they not having, I'm not making you participate. That's what I don't get, you know. But people get on my nerves a lot of times. I hope this was interesting. This is my first one. It's gonna get better than this, I promise. I'm still trying to find my footing and my format and how I'm gonna do the show. So I'm still trying to find my groove, but I'm gonna get a lot better at this. I'll just say, please stick with me, and please just take the information. That's the main thing for me. It's just, I want people to take the information from this. You know, yeah, the stories are good. You know, I give the stories as kind of like a reference, but the information is what's important. And so the takeaway, you know, hopefully for you would be that child neglect is something that can really, really hurt the child's future. Is not giving them the, you know, the time and emotional stability that they need. Because that was what I feel is what really just did him in, was it was just the neglect and him not having an outlet to be able to, you know, express how he felt. It's like, just imagine you have all this stuff going on and you don't have nobody to talk to about it. I couldn't imagine that, man. It's awful. Even now, even as an adult now, it's like, if I got all this crap going on, if I don't have nobody I can talk to, man, I don't know. Man, I don't know who y'all gonna get. I'm not gonna be very fun to be around. I couldn't imagine having years and years and years and years and years of stuff from childhood, you know, building up in my system because I didn't have nobody to talk to about it. But yeah, that's Jeffrey Dahmer. Again, I'm not making no excuses for him, because, you know, he's not the only one that has gone through that kind of stuff. And plenty of people out there, and they didn't choose to become serial killers or go out and murder people. So it's not an excuse, but you can see that if you're a parent of a child that's being neglected, or you need to do something. If you're not giving your child the attention, you need to make sure you step in, because it can change the trajectory of their life. They might not become serial killers, but it can change how they show up in the world later on. Something as simple as child neglect. Something as simple as you working all the time because you're trying to make ends meet and not giving your child the attention that they need and deserve. That in itself can cause a lot of damage and do a lot of damage to your child. So make time for your kids, man, because neglect was, I feel like, the main issue in this case with Jeffrey Dahmer. He just needed somebody to show him some kindness and attention and interest. So I'm trying to get this stuff going, man. It is not easy, and I'm a person that has a one-track mind, so this is really going to be a good exercise for me, because it is hard for me to do two things at once. And so you asking me to do makeup, well, you're not asking me, but me trying to do makeup and talk about something that's not related to makeup, and I'm like, oh girl, what? I will be back next Monday with another episode. I'm gonna find an easier makeup look that didn't require so much concentration, because I think I was really concentrating and focusing on these wing liners, and we want them to be even and all that stuff. So yeah, but thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please stick with me as I journey through this whole mental health and Makeup Monday thing. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next week in episode 2.